don't limit yourself. It's like, just apply for that job too as well. If you say like, I've had all these transferable skills and experience, like I've done something like this before, like you just never know. Best managers I've had have tried to teach me how to do their job. Like you said, I feel like the happiest ever been.
Alrighty-o, Amanda, welcome to Money Bites.
Thank you for having me, laughing already.
All right, I just gotta say, starting with your jacket, you are one of the most fashionable person I know. So I popped out like the most fashionable turtleneck I have in my closet. Something that is not black and white.
No.
Thank you so much for coming on. What is a one-liner of yourself? Can you introduce yourself?
One-liner. I would say I am a fun-loving, entertainment-seeking, design-loving, analytically driven operations manager based in Austin, Texas.
I can vouch for all of that. We were a former colleague where I was a huge fan of yours. I think I have openly pronounced my fangirling of you in multiple occasions. So I can vouch for all of that. Second question. What is a trivia of you that people don't know of?
Oh, that people don't know. Oh, well, most people don't know. Like I mentioned, I'm an operations manager. I've been working operations for a really long time, but I actually have a second minor in art history, 17th to 20th century European art and architecture, to be politically correct and exact.
Love it, love it. Before we go into fashion, what is your current role and what do you do?
Yeah, so currently I'm a couple months in. I am the senior operations manager for EA Sports at Electronic Arts. So really focused on helping to drive a lot of our external partnerships. So really kind of partner with a lot of teams internally to drive a lot of the external partnerships that help with some of the development on the video games. So it's a little bit of a new industry for me, but a lot of learning to do, but it's been really, really great so far.
Love it. All right. So let's dig into how you got there. It started with your love of fashion. You thought you were going to be working in fashion, and when we look at your career satisfaction graph, there is this stellar spike, a very pointy spike with your first job. Was that your dream job?
I think it wasn't necessarily my dream, but I think it unlocked, the trajectory for my career. I think more because, so that first job out of college, I was working at, some of my elder millennials might remember Charming Charlie, the retailers of yesteryear, but was really in a job, I think, kind of first out of college. And I think at that time that the company was in, it was growing exponentially and was really in an environment to where there was a lot of different backgrounds from people joining the company. I think everyone, again, had the excitement around the trajectory and the growth that the company was headed at the time, and was really, again, surrounded by, I think, by a lot of individuals who were just open and willing to learn and to teach. And it really just kind of allowed me to have a lot of exposure and I think a lot of responsibility just because of the hyper growth stage the company was in at a super young age. And I think as well, retail in general, which is one of the aspects that I love about that sector, is that you're always having to think ahead. You're planning a year out. By the time people see things in the stores or see things, like on the shelves, like that was probably done a year ago. And so it just really kind of had like this constant environment and developed an environment that was pushing me, I think, a lot further and having to think more strategically than like what was in front of me from very, like, again, like at the start of my career, which I think really has kind of carried a lot forward for me. And so I think, like I said, that first initial peak, I think, at the start, is that's kind of all you would hope. I think kind of coming out of your first job of, you're able to kind of have that growth and that learning, but also to kind of be surrounded by a lot of really smart and caring people, to kind of nurture that environment.
What was your actual role? What were you doing?
So I was a allocation analyst. I started in the watch department. Essentially, like my role was to analyze store sales. So I would analyze like how products were selling among the store base and kind of decide as to do we need to invest more inventory or kind of what were our top selling stores, kind of understanding the merchandise analytics.
So you found yourself by chance in a industry that you really enjoyed
Mhm.
with coworkers that you really was nurturing you, but your career trajectory, as high as it went up, was a very pointy, sharp decline. What happened?
Yeah. So as I was moving out of that first job, I got an opportunity with a different retailer to kind of move back to Austin. I was living in Houston at the time. So again, I think the ability to come back to Austin was a huge draw and plus to essentially do the same job that I was doing, but again, another hyper growth company. And I at that time kind of was like, this is the right move, kind of listened to my gut a little bit and was like, I kind of still knew this was the right move for me. But I think as time kind of went on, I think over that kind of like year and a half that I was there after terming Charlie, it really kind of presented, I think, a realization to me in a lot of ways. I think, as much as there's a lot of growth and I think learning from a professional standpoint in like hyper growth companies, a lot of times like the people themselves are, growing and learning at the same time. And I just slowly started realizing that it wasn't an environment for me where I felt like I was being my best or able to be my best self and my healthiest self. And it really was a little bit of a spiral, I think, for me, kind of with that. I think in terms of understanding that this might not be the best place for me, this might not be the healthiest environment for me to keep going. And it started to getting to the point where I was burning out. And I think even physically, it was starting to present itself. Like I was starting to have like panic attacks and going into work, like it was starting to get to a point where, like the red flags were there that like I just couldn't keep going with this. And so that's kind of where you see that dip. I think it wasn't just the physical pieces that were presenting itself, but also too was kind of the realization that like this dream I had of working in fashion and doing that like as my job probably wasn't going to be the reality in this immediate future. And I had tied that so deeply to who I was like as a person.
Do you think, from a more experienced Amanda looking back at a younger Amanda who
Mhm.
was in that situation, would your advice have been to identify and try to change something within the company, or identify the symptoms and get out faster?
Yeah, I think definitely the latter. I think for and again, I kind of say that too in the sense of and I say this too in the sense of it, and I give this piece of advice, like I think to a lot of people, in that the longer it goes on, the harder it is it's for you to even be in a place to be productive. Because I think even at that time, like I said, it had been like a slow burn of a long trail to get to that point. And at that point, you're just so emotionally raw and I think reactive that it it makes you hard to think as clearly as you probably could be. And so that's kind of what I look back now, and like you said, you only know what you know now or have the experience that you have now. And I do wish I left earlier, I think in that sense. But like you said, I think that I know it's such a personal choice, and speaking from a place of privilege as well. And I think that's what keeps a lot of people locked into situations and jobs that maybe they're not as happy with, because it's the fear, right, of like what can happen. And so even now, whenever I talk about this with people, I always kind of tell them as to write down a list. I'm like, write down a list of why you're afraid to make that move or make that decision, and you'll very be able to probably clearly see in the sense of what are elements that are are tactical, right? Like, okay, I need to have X amount, of money saved up. Okay, like I need to have like my prescriptions taken care of, right? Like, and then versus what are the aspects that are more ego driven, as to I'm afraid of what people are going to think. I'm afraid of what people are going to say, like how I'm going to tell, my parents, right? And I think that kind of helps you be able to identify as to what's the actual fear here that I'm having.
Well, in this next phase, meta comes calling. I
Mhm.
found something that you said really interesting. One, you never thought possible that you'd be able to work at a place like Meta. And two, you never thought possible what you were able to achieve at Meta. First, how did you get into Meta?
So I actually had interviewed for a full-time role, had made it on the team that we were both like eventually on. Um, I made it all the way through the loop, ended up not getting it. And coincidentally, at the same time, I think they were also hiring for some contract roles on the team. And I got reached out about maybe being a contractor on the team, which I think at that time I kind of just took as a sign that I was like, I'm meant to be here. And I did really connect with everybody that I met through that interview loop. And like I said, got a good sense of like, again, was trying to refine like what was that energy? What was that, safe space, I think, in a lot of ways within the people that I would be, interacting and joining with. And a lot of those things were being clicked and checked in check boxes. And so I ended up taking the contract role on our team. And like you said, that's just kind of how it ended up happening.
And I guess my next question here was, through your experience, you mentioned something about the importance of managers and people believing in you and giving you a chance. What would you say is the difference between a good versus a bad versus a exceptional manager?
I say this wholeheartedly now. I think like of like your manager, and again, I think that immediate leadership layer kind of within your universe at work are single-handedly going to be like the most important people in your career and personally to you. Like again, they always say like it's whoever you spend like your most most of your time with. We spend a lot of time at work. And I think for me, that always, I think too as well, has been something that I critically evaluate like, as like I whenever I'm interviewing for like a new job. I think the teams that I have seen function at such a high level, and I think it's like the qualities of the managers that I've had that have achieved that. And I also too want to clarify, it's like it it wasn't joining Meta that I think sent me on this next phase of trajectory. It was the people and the environment that, and again, the team we were on that allowed that to happen. I think that's a separating point of the two. Because I want to give the people, they know who they are, I think, the props of what that means. But I think the elements of that, I think the biggest one is psychological safety. I think if you have to create an environment where people feel safe, I think, to bring up questions, to challenge how we're currently operating. I think bringing like you listening, I think is the biggest thing, that you can allow somebody to have space to have, I think, at work. And that sense of safety is really what I think carries exceptional teams, because at the end of the day, it's like you can have disagreements. Some people think, there's different ways, of doing things. But if you have that understanding that, the person at the other side of the screen or the other side of the table in that conference room, at the end of the day, we both want the same thing. It's just to make whatever we're doing better or operate in the best way. It allows for that healthy place of dialogue. And I think second to, I think of allowing you to also manage your, I hate to say manage your career, but I think it's being in an open space of like managing your interest is probably, I think, like how I put it, is because I think one of the bigger aspects, okay, we'll edit this part out so I sound like coherent. I think, because I think number two is in the sense of managing your, like helping you manage your interest, is because I think, as you understand and as you keep growing and evolving, like kind of within your career, you're going to understand, like, where do you see that spark? What are the projects? What are the teams? Or do you like what this other person is doing on this team that might not be on your immediate team? You're going to start seeing, like, where are those peripheral sparks kind of outside of maybe some of your core functions that light you up, that energize you. And you really need someone who's going to nurture those things versus suppress them, and allows you to grow kind of within that. I always kind of say, like, the best managers I've had have tried to teach me how to do their job.
Mm.
And that's because at the end of the day, it's, you need to have someone who is going to nurture that growth and development. And again, too, especially if that growth and development might also to kind of be outside of your scope, like, they're going to go help you make that connection. Right. And so I really think in between those two things, I think really kind of, I think, provide a healthier environment for people to really kind of nurture that soil so that they can grow.
Super interesting, because I feel, especially at Meta, the career tracks are different for ICs versus managers.
Mhm.
And sometimes I find very high performing ICs don't
Mhm.
always make great managers, and vice versa. Like, I feel like
Mhm.
it's two different skill sets.
Yes.
So when you say managers help you do their job, is that more of like unblocking you, or are they teaching you specific skills or the network?
I again, this is where I, again, like, I think from my personal experience too as well, of like managing, is like, that's a very hyper unique um uh like development that, like, you would have to have with each of your individual reports, because people need different things and people want different things, I think, from their managers. That, some people really want to lean on them to, like, help me just do within the scope of my work and my best work. And some people really are, they're like, I'm focused on, I just want to understand how I can be more analytical, I can be more data driven, or how are you, coming up with these suggestions. And I think something for me that's always, like, within the scope of the people that I've managed, I've always made that my number one is to try to teach, because it's the same thing. I'm like, I need you to understand, from within the scope of this role, just some of the elements of the reasons why I'm doing these things, and like why I'm making the decisions that I'm making, or why I'm saying no to this team, or explain to me kind of how you would think through this situation. Because at the end of the day, that's the only ability you're going to have to be able to let go, so you can focus on, I think, elements and things that your own personal growth, like, too, as well. And also, you can take PTO and not feel like you don't have to worry. So I think it also two sides of that coin. And so, like you said, I think it's a very, like, hyper individualistic,
Mm.
element that, like, a manager, has to evaluate with, like, their IC and their, direct reports. But I think, like, again, that element of teaching, I think, is huge, huge, huge as to, like, what makes, like, again, a safe environment.
I do want to click into something that you said earlier, which was this checking for the caliber of a manager is something that you're doing during interviews. How do you do that?
Yeah. I think if there's not an IC kind of within, like, my interview loop, I have directly asked, and I did this in one of my last rounds, of like, when's the last time, like, you implemented feedback based on, like, a team suggestion? And I watch the reaction, because you can see when people stumble and you can see when people,
My
yeah,
way or
no,
the highway.
because and again, I think in the nature of, it could be too, just the nature and the culture that we're in right now. Be direct. You're okay. You're, as a interviewee, as a, potential employee, you have the ability to be direct. Because at the end of the day, like, I think that, again, that was just really, for me, my biggest worry wasn't, oh, can I do the job? Like you said, I know I have some skills. Like I know I can do something. I know I can get in there and do a job. I was
Absolutely.
more worried about like what's the environment that I'm walking into. So that's always my number one. It's like, when's the last time that like you've implemented feedback? Again, what's like your typical, how do you typically like to structure one-on-ones and check-ins and be informed? Because that also too gives you a sense of like, how are they managing those currently within their team? And is that a priority for them? And I think second too, of like, what is like the typical, I would say, what's the typical like career growth and journey that, comes out of the role? But I asked, I was like, what if from your viewpoint have kind of been the biggest growth that you experienced from the ICs that kind of within your team who are currently there over the course of the last year? And like, how have you helped to drive that? That's something that I started asking to, because again, it helps you better understand like what is their involvement with their teams.
I love that insight. Those advice are spot on. When's the last time you took in feedback and acted on it? I love that. I'm gonna use that if I
Mhm.
ever get an interview again. um, well, you had a roller coaster of a ride up in terms of career satisfaction at Meta. I'm sure some of your tendencies to just excel in the things that you do led to it. I remember seeing Amanda is doing what? She like doubled, tripled the team. She is now in LATAM and new geographies. What? You were like building a whole new program by yourself. It seems that acceleration, too big, too fast, kind of also contributed to the second peak. What happened with your second burnout?
Yeah. And because exactly what you said, it's, I think at that time, it was probably a little bit like before COVID. So it probably was like 2019-ish, kind of through the next like few years. Like our team in general was in hyper growth. There was just a lot growing very quickly. There was a lot of demand for like our team's remit and kind of the impact that they're having. And that needed to catch up very quickly. And so there was a lot that even kind of as we were moving into the pandemic, that was kind of one of the first things that or analysis that I did was this KPI analysis for the VP at the time. And I was like, well, like if we need to achieve what we're trying to achieve, like we've actually been under hiring for the past 2 years, and I need to grow and do. That was kind of the first initial analysis that I found. And so, kind of that first phase of hyper growth was really kind of through the very early onsets of the pandemic. That's when we first doubled the team. And so I think through that time, and I am so helpful for it, like I said, I did not do that all by myself. Like there were a lot of people, and I so appreciate there was a lot of dedicated people that, on our team that were dedicated to just making it the best that we could be, that I would have completely fallen apart without. And I think a lot of them know who they are. But if they weren't like in place. But I think for me though, personally, like you said, it was a lot, I think, on my shoulders to make sure that this could work for everybody and work at the growth and the scale of that, what our team was needing at the time. And probably about, I would say probably early 2022, I was starting to kind of notice that we're running out of gas.
Mm.
And I think for me, it really kind of came down to, like I said, it was a lot of growth. And I think there was a lot of I wouldn't say tension is probably isn't the right word, but I think there was just a lot of questions as to, is this really the right way that are we growing effectively? Okay, are there a lot of different elements from like a tech perspective, from like an outsourcing perspective? Like, are we needing to like make sure we're really putting in our investments in the right place and setting up the next phase? So I think there was a lot more scrutiny like around the again, initiatives that like Infra was doing at the time. And I think coupled with, like you said, am I making people happy? Like, like the disappointment, and I think too, like, okay, like, am I really doing the right thing? And, I think a lot of that noise and chatter was starting to get to me. And I was starting to get those feelings of like, okay, like, again, for me, like you said, it's like when it's the bubbliness isn't there, like that's starting to get indicator for me that like something like needs to change. At that point, like, have been kind of in the same ish role for about 5 years. I was just like, this might be the time. And I really kind of set for myself of like, probably in the next year, like give
Mm,
yourself a timestamp, right? Of like, we
mm,
need to figure out what this is. I think to exactly your kind of, we were talking about at the very beginning of, is this something I can change environmentally, or is it time for me to either look for another role at the company or look outside the company if I really had to? And so, like you said, it was just kind of that check-in with myself. Like I slowly started realizing like those signs were there.
Given this was your second spike and
Mhm.
second burnout, in both times you started off the career at a euphoria of like just really loving your role. What's your lesson learned after two burnouts?
Do that check-in with yourself, and this is again the advice I give everybody is to have that list of those non-negotiables for yourself around work. Because like you said, like for me, it's, do I feel like I'm doing my, like, operating like at my best capacity? Like I said, do I feel like I'm coming into a space with enthusiasm, right? And like the light and the levity, right? Of the role. Like, do I feel like I'm showing up as my best self? Like whatever those are for you, because that's going to help you have that baseline to react against. Because I think, like I mentioned, I think a lot of times, sometimes people don't realize it's happening when it's happening, and then you already gone too far.
So your non-negotiables were
Mhm.
getting really stretched thin,
Mhm.
and I think you are one of the few that I've spoken with who said when the meta layoffs happened and you saw the severance, you were like happy.
I I like I think, again, I happy is context, like I said,
Mm,
that's a
mhm.
different frame for everybody, right? Like, could it always be more money? Absolutely. I mean, please. I mean, I was an invaluable member of the team. But I think that for me at the time, like I said, I had already kind of been in this wondering of, I feel like my next might look different than what it is today. So I was already kind of on that emotional journey of like, of,
Mm.
do I stay? Do I go? Like, do I try to, rearrange what, my work scope is kind of within the team? And so by the time when the layoffs happened, I was like, that's just the universe making the decision for me. I was like, this is, I was like, I'll take the sign, of like, this is what, was meant for me. And, I think for me personally, like between the severance that I was given and between my own personal savings, even I had just closed on my house 2 months prior. But I was
Perfect
like,
timing.
perfect timing. That I was like, I'm still going to be okay.
Mm.
Well, more than okay. And so I think for me in those first couple days, I think after the layoff happened and, everyone was kind of like deciphering as like what just went on. And like, again, it was random and it wasn't personal. I think you kind of like take some of that emotion like out of it. Like after like the second or third day, I was like, no one's pinging me. I'm waking up, the birds are chirping. Like, I can watch the Today Show in peace. That is my guilty pleasure on in the morning. Like, I was like, we're going to be just fine. We are going to be just fine. And I think that's just kind of really, what carried me. I feel like over like the months that, I eventually like took off.
And I would love to go into some of the next periods that
Mhm.
the new adventures that you're setting out to. But before that, given Winnie is a app and community of women in tech empowering to make financial literacy actionable, I have to look at the discrepancy in your net worth graphs, the two net worth graphs that you drew. So the first
Mhm.
one was like it takes a dip, a measurable dip after your layoffs. You were sort of working off of your savings. And I
Mhm.
super applaud the fact that, money is just a tool and it's you had that safety net.
Mhm.
So I love that. But when we sort of looked at what really is net worth, you had a
Yeah.
second graph that continued to move up and towards the right. Why? Why the discrepancy?
Because I think for me, I always kind of separated the two. I think and I'll say this because I'll say this kind of in two parts of, for me, I think up until this kind of phase of life, like it was very, and again, too, like coming out of college, wasn't making that much money, I think at all, right? I think it really was just like, what do I have liquid? I was like, what's in my bank account right at this moment? The thoughts of investing, the thoughts of stocks was such a far, something out of my mind. And I think some of that really kind of has stuck with me. I think of that sense of like, I am a saver. I will say this when around, like I save. And I think just having that safety net for me really just allows me to feel like, okay, whatever could potentially happen, I know that I'm going to be okay. Right. I think from that standpoint, that like anything that really, knock on wood, kind of comes my way, I'm going to be able to financially be, cover in that standpoint. But I think, especially as I think Meta was really like my first job where I had more dynamics too, as well. To like, what does a compensation package look like, right? In terms of we had bonuses, we had RSUs, you had all these different elements that, that were kind of at play outside of just like your traditional base salary and maybe like a 401k. And I always say this to you, and I think it really kind of sparks this additional conversation for me because my dad always, I mean, I think he first bought my brother and I like stocks for Christmas when we were like sixth grade, and I was just like, and
Love
I'm like,
that.
yeah, like I'm very thankful for my parents, but like it, I think it wasn't until now, and I think this phase, like in my life, that like even with my dad, I've been able to, with his guidance, I think just have a more robust conversation around like, what does that bigger picture look like? And he really was the one too, as well as like buying a house is also going to be like an equal net investment, especially being in Austin and
Mm.
the insanity of the real estate market that this continues to be, as to if I'm going to stay here, which it really was like, this is going to be where I stay for the foreseeable future, of like, this is the right next investment for you.
Love it. You had that financial prowess. A few other things changed for you after Meta. One was really sort of like you said, revisiting what are your non-negotiables. And I have to mention an app here that you mentioned was single-handedly one of the most impactful apps that you've used. Bumble. Bumble BFF. So apparently this is like pertinent to your adult friendship making experience in Austin.
No, because like no, and like, look, shout out to Bumble BFF. Like I have met some of, I would say, like my closest friends today, kind of randomly off that app. But I think too, like as well, this is a little bit probably like pre-layoff, where I was just having this feeling of like, I need to expand my community. Like I need to expand like the people in my circle. And I was like, what's this thing? Like, I am not like, that is not typically like my avenue, I think, of like meeting people. But I was like, let me get on it and see. And like, I think through a lot of like just serendipitous, like connections and, I think people just putting themselves out there. Like I said, I was able to meet like a really great group of women. I want to say girls, women. Like I said, who are
Yes.
just dynamic and fun and the most vivacious little group that we were able to create. And I think that too kind of helped me navigate, like you said, like that period post layoff too as well, is like just having that community there that also too I think really kind of helped like ask like, okay, like this aspect of my identity is changing, but like here are some constants, right? Like I have all these different elements and different other hobbies and these groups and communities that are helping carry me through whatever this next phase is going to look like. Yeah, I need a shout out to my tribe. Like they really too, I think, kind of again have really kind of helped, propel me through like this period, as well. And like you said, I feel like the happiest ever been. Oh my god.
Oh.
Oh.
Let me take a cue off of that. So after Meta, you went to a company, didn't have the best of experience,
Hmm.
and then you're going into a completely new industry. So you're going from fashion to tech and now into games. How are you navigating your direction in career?
I feel I know people always say that. That's like the first piece of feedback I always get. They're like, "Oh, you've done so many different things," and I'm like, "Yeah." Like again, it's half like what's the Renee rap sound like a delusion, but also too like I said, it's also like I think what has carried me more is like it's that feeling. Like I mentioned, going back to the non-negotiables. Like that would be the hashtag for this episode of like what sparks me joy in work, like what is that, the environment I want to be in. And those have always kind of been like what I've tried to guide myself in terms of career outside of industry, because I think that's the biggest piece as well, is that there are transferable skills everywhere. Like as much as yes, like you might need some level of certain specializations like in many roles in different like industries, like I think a lot of roles too as well, which also takes, like again, mentioned the vision of, the other incoming teams or the folks that are interviewing you to say like, hey, this girl might not have gaming experience, but she has every other quality that we need for someone to fit in this role. And that's something we can teach. And that is something that I really kind of sold me on this next role. They're like, we don't care that you don't have gaming experience. And I was like, we can teach you that. We can teach you how games are made. It's like, but everything else is like the experience that we need. And so that's what also too, it's like, don't limit yourself. It's like, just apply for that job too, as well. If you say like, I've had all these transferable skills and experience, like I've done something like this before, like you just never know to if you're going to have that chance and that opportunity, too as well.
Well, a question on that. How do you find interesting opportunities?
I mean, I don't do anything I feel like out of the ordinary that most people do. It's like was a LinkedIn crawler. I think like everybody might be, but I think what I did start doing, I think a little bit more post layoff though, was more trying to find like who were the heads of talent, like who were the recruiters, or like who were maybe the hiring managers, and try to follow a little bit more closely as like they were posting if they had jobs, were saying like, hey, I have a role open or whatever it might be, versus just waiting, for like the actual jobs to be posted, just to kind of see if I can get like a little of a head start. But I mean, even whenever I reached out to one of the recruiters about my role at EA, like I had like it was around Halloween, and I had like a spunky little headline, and I got like a response back. I think I remember exactly what it said. I was like, it might be spooky season, but me as your next like operations manager isn't. That's what I said. Mhm.
Love
So
it. Love it.
here we are today.
Closing out, operations manager. So you've had, like you said, transferable skills, experience in this for a while now. A pie chart, and we're gonna think of this like the 100% of your energy in a week.
I got
Time
it.
slash energy. How would you say it is spent as an operations manager? Where do you spend your time and energy?
I would probably say a good 20% I probably spend with myself, like in terms of self organization,
Mm-hmm.
of like how, like, what are we doing? Right? Like, I think the internal strategy piece. And then, oh, so now you're gonna, my mental math. I'm going to keep track of what I'm saying. I would probably say like then the next 40 I think is more internal. I would say this is like XFN alignment.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of meetings. It's a lot of let's figure out how you're feeling. Like, how does this impact you? I think just a lot of XFN management. I would say, yeah, the next 20% probably is more like what's reporting, analyzing. I would say the actual program management piece of it, right? Of like making sure people are informed, doing the work to make sure that everybody is aware as to what's going on. And then I would say the other 20% is probably just me. We can say it's miscellaneous. I think that's just the giving space if it's like other things I want to, like pursue or dive into. Like you said, I think what I always appreciated so much about being in these types of like operations and program management roles that you get a lot of exposure just to different areas of the company. And I think there always is like this sense of like you're like, oh, like I didn't know this tool existed, or I didn't know this person kind of was interrelated to whatever I'm working on in some way. And so I try to always leave like some space to have like that type of discovery, like for myself to be able to say like, hey, is this something that we should maybe do?
I do think that's part of your superpower in the fact that you're so good at connecting the dots and spotting opportunity on how do we get bigger faster.
Oh, thank you.
Before we leave off, I do have to go back to a money question. One of the pre-call quotes that you shared, which really stuck with me, was when you bought the house, it was your first, big ticket item.
Mhm.
And that was when you realized I can grant myself the permission to treat myself. Where did that mental shift come from?
Yeah, I think because like I said, I think outside of I bought my car, my first car like after like my high school car. But I think other than that, like the house really was, I mean, it was a huge investment. I think like hitting the transfer button, that down payment, like clutching my pearls. But I think for me, like I had always kind of, like I said, I've been a saver. I think just something always, within me. I was like, okay, like we're saving, saving, saving. I think especially more that like I was starting to get on the track of like buying a house, really is probably the most financially like responsible thing for me to do personally. And like my next step, like I really, started, taking that like pretty aggressively. But like I would buy little things for myself. Like you said, like I'm a fashion girly. Like I definitely would buy, like some, little treats and stuff for myself. But like I think really, I think the magnitude though of like buying the house and putting, that first set of like money down and, doing the math, of like, okay, like this actually is going to be cheaper for me than like continuing to pay rent, like living in like downtown Austin, like, and that started to become more of a realization to me. It really, I think, allowed me to understand like, I just put all that money into something. Now I kind of have this thing, right? I was like, I put all that money away. I was like, now I have this house. But I think for me, just that transaction though gave me this physical representation of something that I was like, okay, but this is mine.
Mm.
And I think especially for me too, as well, like having such a creative second side of my brain and like being such a design nerd and like loving art and like all these different kind of like more design focused things, it really also too kind of gave me like, this is the investment in myself. I now have this thing that I can personally make my own, have this creative outlet and invest in myself. And it did unlock, I think, a lot for me in the sense of, because I think that's too as well. It's like as much as everybody's on this wealth journey, like you do have to build in whatever that is for you of like, what is that outlet that you can use that money as well to fund in a again, I'm always the friend that's going to tell you go buy it if you like it. Like I was like, don't come to me. As long as you're being financially smart, whatever assessment you have for yourself, I'm not going to tell you not to buy it, but it
I
really,
love you first saying buy it and then all the caveats afterwards.
look, I was like, you do you. I'm going to tell you if it's cute or not. Like, that's the question I was asked, but like you said, I think it really did, like I said, unlock that for me. And I think like with the house, like you said, I'm so big of like personal space and like being surrounded by things that like bring you great energy and bring you joy that you want to, like be around. I mean, like I'm personally probably keeping home goods afloat, like at this point, but I mean, like it's just, but it really did unlock that for me. And like that's kind of started like the next phase for me of like I've been starting to like art collect and like, research artists and start buying, art for myself, which also too is another, aspect of investing, and it's, holds its value like as well.
It is. I love how all of this is coming full circle. You started with fashion and your enthusiasm for clothing, and
Mhm.
then through your experience and after going through both the highs and the lows, you're coming to a place where you're both comfortable and confident in yourself, and it's coming back to art. That's awesome. Amanda, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and story.
Well, thank you for having me, Minky, getting me out of my comfort zone in 2024. I love it.